Sometimes, the loneliest moments come when you realize you're living a life that no longer fits. At 44, Maren sat in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by everything she once was, but no longer recognized as herself. She'd been divorced for 8 months now, living alone in the house where her parents had raised her. Most evenings, she ordered takeout and played old records, letting familiar melodies fill the silence that had become her constant companion. One Friday night, after too much wine and too many memories, she did something she'd regret. She sent a text to an old number. "I wish you were here." She thought it belonged to her high school crush from 25 years ago. The message reached Cole instead, a tech millionaire who'd grown tired of his empty success. Something about those words moved him. The next evening, he drove across the state and knocked on her door. What happens when a message meant for the past creates an unexpected future? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house on Maple Street had been in Maren's family for 43 years, built the year she was born. Her father had chosen the lot specifically for the mature oak tree in the front yard, claiming it would provide character and shade for generations. Now, as autumn painted its leaves gold and crimson, Maren often wondered if that tree had outlived its purpose, much like she felt she had outlived hers. The vinyl record collection occupied an entire wall of the living room, each album carefully catalogued in her father's methodical handwriting. Miles Davis, Ella Fitzgerald, Johnny Cash, Bob Dylan, the soundtrack to a marriage that had lasted 37 years until cancer took her father 3 years ago. Her mother had followed 18 months later, leaving Maren to inherit not just the house, but the weight of all the memories contained within its walls. At 44, she'd never imagined she'd be living in her childhood bedroom again. The divorce had been swift but financially devastating. Richard had been thorough in his preparations, consulting lawyers and financial advisors for months before announcing he was leaving. By the time the papers were signed, Maren found herself with little more than her teaching pension and the childhood home that had been left to her in trust. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now worked part-time at the very library where she'd spent countless afternoons as a child, hiding between the stacks with Nancy Drew mysteries. 25 hours a week, cataloging books and helping patrons navigate the digital systems that had transformed libraries into community centers. It paid enough to cover utilities and groceries, but little else. "You're looking thoughtful again," Mrs. Chen observed from across the circulation desk. At 78, Eleanor Chen had been the head librarian for 15 years, and she possessed the uncanny ability to read people as easily as she read book spines. Dangerous territory for a Friday afternoon. Maren glanced up from the returned books she'd been mechanically scanning, just thinking about weekend plans. The glamorous life of a divorced woman in suburbia. Mrs. Chen's tone held no mockery, only the gentle understanding of someone who'd buried her own husband 12 years prior. Takeout and television? "You know me too well." Mrs. Chen moved closer, lowering her voice, though the library was nearly empty. "You know, my neighbor's nephew is visiting next week. Divorced, works in insurance, very nice man. Eleanor." Maren's voice carried a warning that made the older woman chuckle. "Fine, fine. But isolation isn't healing, dear one. It's just comfortable suffering." The words followed Maren home that evening as she unlocked the front door and was greeted by the familiar silence. She'd grown accustomed to the quiet, even found comfort in it, after years of Richard's constant criticism disguised as concern. But lately, the silence felt heavier, more permanent. She moved through her evening routine with practiced efficiency. Leftover Chinese food heated in the microwave, a glass of wine poured from the bottle she'd opened earlier in the week, and the careful selection of tonight's musical companion. Her fingers traced the record spines until they found Norah Jones's "Come Away With Me," an album that never failed to transport her to a time when possibilities still felt endless as the first notes filled the room. Maren settled into her father's recliner with her wine and the photo album she'd been avoiding for weeks. Wedding pictures, honeymoon shots from Italy, holidays with Richard's family, who'd gradually stopped inviting her to gatherings once the separation became official. 22 years of marriage reduced to a single album that now felt like evidence of someone else's life. The wine loosened the tight grip she usually kept on her emotions. 3 glasses in, she found herself staring at a picture of herself at 22, radiant in white lace, believing with absolute certainty that love was permanent and dreams were inevitable. That young woman had planned to travel, to write, to create something meaningful. Instead, she'd supported Richard through law school, postponed her own graduate work, and gradually transformed from partner to supporting player in someone else's ambitions. Her phone sat on the side table, its black screen reflecting the lamplight like an accusation. How long had it been since someone had called just to hear her voice? When was the last time she'd received a text that wasn't automated or work-related? The thought led to another, more dangerous impulse. Somewhere in her contacts was a number she'd saved years ago during a high school reunion planning committee. Tommy Hernandez, her first love, the boy who'd kissed her under the bleachers and promised they'd always be friends. She'd never had the courage to reach out, but she'd kept his number like a talisman against complete isolation. The wine made her fingers bold as she scrolled through old contacts. There it was, Tommy HHS. She stared at the digits, remembering summer nights and shared dreams and the breathless certainty that 18-year-old love could conquer anything. Without allowing herself to think, she typed, "I wish you were here." The message disappeared into the digital void, leaving only the immediate rush of regret that follows impulsive honesty. What had she been thinking? Tommy was probably married with children, living in some distant suburb with no memory of the awkward girl who'd loved him with desperate intensity. She set the phone aside and finished her wine, letting Norah Jones's voice carry her towards sleep. Tomorrow she'd wake with a hangover and the lingering embarrassment of middle-aged foolishness. But tonight, for just a moment, she'd reached across the years towards something that had once made her feel alive. 300 miles away in downtown Portland, Cole Davidson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse apartment, watching the city lights blur together like a pointillist painting. At 46, he'd achieved everything he'd once thought he wanted. The tech company he'd built from his garage had grown into a corporation worth hundreds of millions. The apartment was featured in architectural magazines, all clean lines and expensive materials that impressed visitors and left him feeling like a stranger in his own space. His phone buzzed against the granite countertop, interrupting his nightly ritual of staring out at a city full of people he didn't know. Most messages at this hour were from his assistant about tomorrow's meetings, or from business partners in different time zones. He almost ignored it entirely. "I wish you were here." 5 words from an unknown number that stopped him mid-reach for his evening scotch. No context, no signature, just raw honesty transmitted through fiber optic cables. In a world of calculated communications and strategic networking, the message felt revolutionary in its simplicity. He'd built his fortune on understanding human behavior, on predicting what people wanted before they knew they wanted it. But this message defied analysis. It wasn't trying to sell him anything or gain access to his resources. It was just loneliness reaching out to loneliness, honest and unguarded. Cole had surrounded himself with people who wanted something from him. Business partners who saw profit margins when they looked at him. Dates who calculated his net worth before dessert arrived. Family members who called when they needed money or connections. The last person who genuinely wanted his company had been his college roommate. And that friendship had dissolved under the pressure of success and geographic distance. He saved the number and set the phone aside. But the message lingered in his mind as he went through his bedtime routine in the master suite that felt more like a hotel room than a home. Who sent messages like that? Who still believed in the possibility that someone, somewhere, might genuinely want their presence? His therapist, Dr. Martinez, would probably call this projection. Cole had been seeing her for 6 months, working through what she diplomatically termed success-related isolation and what he privately acknowledged as soul-crushing loneliness. He'd achieved every goal he'd set for himself and discovered that achievement was a poor substitute for connection. "You've optimized your life for efficiency," Dr. Martinez had observed during their last session. But human connection isn't efficient. It's messy and unpredictable and requires vulnerability. When was the last time you took an action that couldn't be justified by business logic? The question had haunted him for weeks. Every decision he made was filtered through risk-benefit analysis, market research, and strategic planning. Even his charitable donations were tax-optimized and carefully structured for maximum public relations impact. But this message, "I wish you were here," felt like a puzzle that couldn't be solved with algorithms or focus groups. It was human in a way that had become foreign to his carefully curated existence. Cole lay in his bed that cost more than most people's cars, staring at the ceiling and thinking about 5 words from a stranger. For the first time in months, he fell asleep without checking his stock portfolio or reviewing tomorrow's agenda. Instead, he dreamed of voices calling across distances, of messages in bottles, washing up on unexpected shores. The next morning brought its usual cascade of meetings and decisions, but the mystery message had lodged itself in his consciousness like a splinter. During a board meeting about quarterly projections, he found himself wondering about the person behind those words. Between calls with investors, he researched the area code and discovered it originated from a small town 300 miles away. It would be simple enough to trace the number more specifically. His company's resources could probably identify the sender within hours. But something about that felt like a violation of the message's vulnerable honesty. Instead, he did something that would have baffled his business associates. He got in his car and started driving. The decision defied every principle he'd used to build his empire. It was inefficient, unpredictable, and based entirely on intuition rather than data. Dr. Martinez would probably see it as progress. His business partners would likely recommend a mental health evaluation. But as he drove away from the city toward an unknown destination, Cole felt something he'd almost forgotten: anticipation for an outcome he couldn't control or predict. Somewhere ahead was a person who'd sent 5 honest words into the darkness, never expecting them to find their target. For the first time in years, he was about to take an action that couldn't be justified by spreadsheets or strategic planning. He was following a feeling toward an uncertain destination, and the uncertainty felt like freedom. Cole's drive through the cascading hills of Oregon into the quieter valleys of rural communities gave him time to question the sanity of his impulse. The rational part of his mind, the part that had built a tech empire from careful analysis and calculated risks, kept suggesting he turn around. What was he planning to do? Knock on random doors, asking if someone had sent a lonely text message the night before? But the message had been so raw, so unguarded, that it demanded a response equally honest. In his world of carefully crafted communications and strategic messaging, those 5 words felt like a cry for help, disguised as wishful thinking. He'd spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. This felt like someone who simply wanted someone. His phone's GPS guided him through increasingly rural roads until he reached the outskirts of Cedar Falls. Population 8,400, according to the welcome sign that also advertised their annual harvest festival and a Lions Club pancake breakfast. The town center consisted of a few blocks of brick buildings, housing a hardware store, a diner, and a surprisingly well-maintained library. American flags hung from lampposts, and the sidewalks were lined with maples that had turned brilliant orange in the October light. Using his company's technology resources, Cole had traced the number to this general area, but he'd deliberately stopped short of pinpointing an exact address. Some instinct told him that approach would feel too invasive, too much like stalking. Instead, he'd decided to trust chance and intuition, 2 factors he'd spent his career trying to eliminate from business decisions. He parked outside the diner and pulled out his phone, staring at the mysterious message for the 100th time. What kind of person sent texts like that? What circumstances led someone to reach out with such unguarded honesty? Meanwhile, 15 minutes across town, Maren was discovering the mortifying consequences of wine-fueled nostalgia. She'd awakened with the particular brand of hangover that came from mixing alcohol with emotional vulnerability, and the immediate memory of her impulsive text had made her stomach clench with embarrassment. Her first instinct had been to send an apology, but when she tried to text the number, her phone indicated it was no longer in service. Relief mixed with confusion. Had she remembered the number wrong? Had Tommy changed his contact information? The uncertainty was almost worse than the embarrassment. At the library, Mrs. Chen took one look at Maren's pale complexion and knowing smile, and pushed a cup of strong coffee across the circulation desk. "Rough evening?" "You could say that." Maren accepted the coffee gratefully, hoping caffeine might clear the fog of regret that seemed to cloud every thought. "Want to talk about it?" "I did something stupid last night." The words came out before Maren could stop them, and suddenly she found herself confessing the entire embarrassing episode to Mrs. Chen, who listened with the patience of someone who'd heard decades of human folly. "So you sent a heartfelt message to someone from your past," Mrs. Chen summarized when Maren finished. "Where exactly is the catastrophe in that?" "I was drunk. It was pathetic. Middle-aged woman sending desperate texts to her high school boyfriend. Or," Mrs. Chen countered gently, "it was a lonely person reaching out for human connection." "There's nothing pathetic about that, dear one. The only tragedy would be if you let embarrassment prevent you from trying again." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the Saturday morning regulars. Elderly men who came to read newspapers they couldn't afford to subscribe to, mothers with restless children seeking story time, and teenagers who treated the library as a refuge from whatever dramas awaited them at home. Maren threw herself into her work, processing returns and helping patrons navigate the computer catalog system. The familiar routine provided comfort, each task a small act of service that reminded her she had value beyond her failed marriage and increasingly solitary existence. She was shelving returned books in the biography section when she heard the soft chime of the front door and looked up to see a man she didn't recognize scanning the library with obvious uncertainty. He was well-dressed, but not formally, khakis and a button-down shirt that looked expensive but understated. Something about his posture suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable in the small-town setting. "Can I help you find something?" she called softly, not wanting to disturb other patrons. He turned toward her voice, and she was struck by the genuine relief in his expression. "Actually, yes. I'm looking for someone, but I'm not sure how to go about it appropriately." Maren moved closer, her librarian instincts engaging. "Are you trying to locate a long-lost relative? We have genealogy resources that might help." "Not exactly." He seemed to struggle with how much to reveal. "Someone from this area sent me a message last night, and I'd like to respond in person. But I realize how that might sound to someone who doesn't know my intentions." Something in his tone made Maren's pulse quicken. The timing, the location, the careful way he was approaching the subject. Surely it couldn't be coincidence. "What kind of message?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He studied her face for a moment, then made what seemed like a decision to trust her. 5 words. "I wish you were here." Sent to my phone around 10:30 last night. The blood drained from Maren's face so quickly she had to grip the bookshelf for support. "That's not possible." "I'm sorry?" "I sent that message, but it was supposed to go to someone else. The number must have been wrong." She was speaking quickly now, embarrassment and confusion making her words tumble together. "I thought it was disconnected when I tried to follow up." Cole felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went beyond the simple solution to a mystery. Standing before him was a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and an expression of mortified honesty that made him want to simultaneously comfort her and applaud her courage. "You sent it," he said. "Not quite a question. I'm so sorry." I had been drinking, and I was looking through old contacts, and I thought I was texting someone from high school. But obviously I had the wrong number, and I had no idea it would actually reach anyone. And my name is Cole, he interrupted gently. Cole Davidson. And I drove 300 miles to find the person who sent that message. Maren stared at him, processing the impossibility of the situation. You drove here? From where? Portland. I received your text last night, and something about it made me realize I needed to meet the person who could send something so honest. Other patrons were beginning to notice their conversation, and Mrs. Chen was watching from the circulation desk with unconcealed interest. Maren felt exposed under the scrutiny of her small-town workplace, acutely aware that this stranger's presence would be the subject of speculation for weeks. This is crazy, she whispered. Completely, Cole agreed. I don't typically make impulsive decisions based on text messages from strangers. But your message felt like the most real communication I've received in years. Maren looked around the library, at the familiar faces of community members who'd known her since childhood, at Mrs. Chen, who was pretending not to eavesdrop, at the normal Saturday afternoon that had suddenly become anything but normal. I don't know what to say. Would you be willing to get coffee? Somewhere we could talk without an audience? The request was reasonable, but it represented a step into unknown territory that frightened her. Everything about this situation defied the careful boundaries she'd built around her life. She didn't know this man, had no way to verify his story or his intentions, but something in his manner suggested genuine interest rather than predatory behavior. And the alternative, sending him away and returning to her routine, felt like choosing safety over the possibility of something extraordinary. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down, she heard herself saying. I get off work in an hour, Cole smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. I'll wait. As he settled into a chair near the windows with a book about local history, Maren tried to return to her shelving duties. But her hands were shaking slightly, and she found herself repeatedly glancing toward the stranger who'd materialized in response to her moment of wine-fueled vulnerability. On the scrap of napkin in his pocket, Cole had written her workplace address after asking for directions at the diner. Now that artifact felt less like stalking and more like destiny, the handwritten proof of his determination to find human connection, despite having only fragments of information. An hour later, as they walked toward the coffee shop in the golden light of an October afternoon, both Maren and Cole wondered if they were making a terrible mistake or taking the first step towards something neither had expected to find. The coffee shop occupied the ground floor of a renovated Victorian house, its mismatched furniture and local artwork creating the kind of authentic atmosphere that couldn't be replicated by corporate chains. Maren chose a table near the back, partially hidden by a bookshelf, displaying volumes by local authors, hoping to minimize the chances of being recognized by other patrons. Cole returned from the counter with 2 steaming mugs, setting hers down carefully before taking the seat across from her. The simple courtesy felt significant after months of primarily interacting with delivery drivers and automated checkout systems. I should probably start by explaining that I'm not usually the type of person who sends random text messages to strangers, Maren began, wrapping her hands around her mug for warmth and comfort. I gathered that, Cole replied with a gentle smile. The message had the quality of someone speaking before they could think better of it. In my experience, those are usually the most honest communications. She studied his face, looking for signs of judgment or condescension, but found only genuine interest. What do you do that gives you experience with honest communications? Most people I know have gotten very good at saying nothing meaningful. I built a tech company. Spent the last 20 years analyzing human behavior patterns, trying to predict what people want before they know they want it. He paused, seeming to consider how much to reveal. Turns out I got very good at understanding consumer desires and very bad at understanding my own needs. What kind of tech company? Software that helps businesses optimize customer engagement. Basically, I help companies figure out how to make people buy things they don't need with money they don't have. The self-deprecation in his voice suggested this wasn't the first time he'd questioned his professional contribution to society. Maren laughed despite herself. That's refreshingly honest. Your text message was refreshingly honest. It made me realize how long it's been since someone said something to me that wasn't calculated for effect. The observation settled between them like a challenge. Maren felt the weight of his attention, the unfamiliar experience of being genuinely listened to rather than simply heard. So you drove 300 miles based on 5 words from a stranger, she said. That seems like either admirable spontaneity or concerning impulsivity. Probably both, Cole admitted. My therapist would likely vote for concerning impulsivity, but it felt like the first authentic impulse I've had in years. The mention of therapy surprised her. In her experience, successful men rarely admitted to needing psychological help, as if emotional struggles were character weaknesses rather than human commonalities. What does your therapist think about this adventure? She doesn't know about it yet. I left Portland this morning without telling anyone where I was going. He seemed to realize how that sounded, which probably adds weight to the concerning impulsivity diagnosis. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the surreal circumstances that had brought them together. Through the window, Maren could see her neighbor's teenage son walking his dog. A scene so normal, it made the extraordinary nature of her current situation feel even more pronounced. Can I ask you something? Cole said eventually. I think we're past the point of formal permission. Who did you think you were texting? The original intended recipient. The question hit closer to home than she'd expected. Someone I knew in high school. We dated for about 6 months when I was 17, and I guess I kept his number all these years, like some kind of security blanket. You never reached out before? Never. Part of me knew he probably wouldn't remember me, or if he did, it would be as that awkward girl who took everything too seriously. She surprised herself with the honesty. I think I kept the number because it represented a time when I believed in happy endings. Cole leaned forward slightly. What changed your mind about happy endings? 22 years of marriage to someone who gradually stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a supporting character in his story. The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. Sorry, that's probably more honesty than you were expecting, I asked, he reminded her gently. And I appreciate directness. Most conversations I have are so layered with subtext and strategic positioning that I forget people can just say what they mean. What about you? Ever married? Engaged twice. Both times to women who were more interested in the lifestyle I could provide than in actually knowing me. He rotated his coffee mug thoughtfully. The second time I realized halfway through the engagement party that I couldn't remember the last time my fiancé had asked me a question about myself that wasn't related to wedding planning or vacation destinations. What did you do? Called it off the next morning. She kept the ring and told our mutual friends I had commitment issues. She wasn't wrong exactly, but she missed the point. I don't have trouble committing to things that matter. I just couldn't figure out what mattered anymore. The admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest, in a way that felt almost too intimate for two people who'd known each other for less than 2 hours. Maren found herself studying his hands as he spoke. No wedding ring, no tan line suggesting recent removal, just the calloused palms of someone who worked with his hands despite his corporate success. Can I ask you something now? She said. Fair's fair. What made you actually get in your car and drive here? The message was 5 words. You don't know anything about me. I could be completely unstable. Cole was quiet for a long moment, seeming to search for words that would convey something complex and not entirely rational. For the last few years, I've felt like I was living someone else's life, like I'd followed a blueprint for success that led to a destination I didn't actually want to reach. He met her eyes directly. Your message felt like it came from someone who was genuinely experiencing their own life, even if that life included loneliness and regret. There was something alive about it, The porch light from the coffee shop's entrance cast a warm glow across their table as afternoon faded toward evening. Other patrons had come and gone, but Maren had lost track of time, absorbed in the unexpected pleasure of conversation, with someone who seemed genuinely curious about her thoughts, rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. This is probably the longest conversation I've had with anyone, besides Mrs. Chen, in months, she admitted. Mrs. Chen, my supervisor at the library. She's become something like a surrogate mother since my parents died. She has opinions about my social life, most of which involve her insisting I need to meet people. She's not wrong, says the man who drove 300 miles to meet a stranger based on a misdirected text. Message, touché, cool. Glanced around the nearly empty coffee shop. Are you hungry? I saw a restaurant down the street that looked promising. The invitation felt like a test of her willingness to extend this improbable encounter. Everything rational told her to thank him for the coffee and return to her predictable evening routine. But something about his presence made her feel more like herself than she had in months. I should probably warn you that dinner in Cedar Falls is not exactly cosmopolitan dining, she said. I wasn't looking for cosmopolitan. The simple response carried weight beyond its surface meaning. He wasn't looking for sophisticated entertainment or impressive venues. He was looking for genuine human connection, the kind that happened around kitchen tables and in small-town diners where people knew each other's names and stories. All right, Maren heard herself saying, but you're buying. It's the least you can do after showing up uninvited in my quiet life. Deal, Cole said, and his smile suggested he understood that her teasing was actually acceptance, a willingness to let this strange day continue toward an uncertain evening. Murphy's Tavern had been serving Cedar Falls for 37 years, and the interior reflected that longevity with wood-paneled walls, decorated with local high school sports photographs and community event announcements. The Saturday evening crowd consisted primarily of families finishing early dinners, and a few regulars who treated the corner booth like their personal office. Maren waved to the owner, Jack Murphy, who'd graduated 2 years ahead of her and had inherited the restaurant from his father. The recognition felt both comforting and exposing. In a town this size, having dinner with an unfamiliar man would be noted and discussed. Popular spot? Cole asked as they settled into a booth near the window. It's one of 3 restaurants in town, so popularity is relative. But Jack makes a decent burger, and the coffee is strong enough to wake the dead. Cole scanned the menu, which featured the kind of straightforward American fare that had sustained small-town diners for generations. No fusion cuisine or molecular gastronomy, just honest food prepared without pretension. Tell me about your work at the library, he said after they'd ordered. Do you enjoy it? Most days, Maren replied, surprised by the genuine interest in his voice. It's not what I plan to do with my life, but there's something satisfying about helping people find what they're looking for. Sometimes they come in asking for one thing and leave with something completely different that turns out to be exactly what they needed. Sounds like today, she laughed. I definitely didn't go to work this morning expecting to have dinner with a stranger who'd driven 300 miles to meet me. What did you plan to do with your life? Before the library. The question touched on territory she rarely discussed, dreams that felt almost embarrassing to acknowledge after so many years of compromise. I wanted to teach high school English, maybe write someday. I had this romantic notion that I could inspire teenagers to love literature the way I did. She stirred her coffee absently. I started a master's program in education, but then Richard got into law school and we decided I should work full-time to support us through his studies. The plan was that I'd go back to school once he was established, but you never did. Life kept happening. His career took off. We bought a house. There never seemed to be a right time to disrupt our financial stability for my degree. The familiar ache of deferred dreams colored her voice. By the time I realized the right time was never going to come, I'd been out of academia for so long that starting over felt impossible. Cole listened without offering solutions or platitudes, a quality that Maren found increasingly rare. Most people felt compelled to fix problems or minimize disappointments, but he simply absorbed her words with quiet attention. "What about now?" he asked. "Is it still impossible? I'm 44 years old, starting over financially after a divorce, living in my childhood bedroom. It's not exactly optimal conditions for pursuing delayed dreams, but not impossible." Something in his tone made her look up from her coffee. "You sound like you speak from experience. I started my company when I was 32, after spending 10 years in corporate jobs that made me feel like I was slowly suffocating. Everyone told me I was crazy to leave a secure position to chase something uncertain." He paused as their food arrived, then continued. "Turned out the biggest risk was staying in a situation that was killing my spirit. That's different. You were building something new, not trying to reclaim something you'd given up. Maybe the distinction matters less than you think." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sarah Mitchell, Maren's closest friend since elementary school, who approached their table with the kind of deliberate casualness that suggested she'd been watching them through the window. "Maren!" Sarah's voice carried artificial brightness. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." "Hi, Sarah." Maren felt her shoulders tense with the familiar discomfort of small-town scrutiny. "This is Cole Davidson." "Cole, this is my friend Sarah." Cole stood to shake Sarah's hand, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that Maren noticed Sarah appreciated despite her obvious curiosity. "Nice to meet you," Sarah said, her eyes taking inventory of Cole's expensive watch and well-tailored clothes. "Are you visiting Cedar Falls?" "Just passing through," Cole replied diplomatically. "How interesting. What brings you to our little town?" Maren intervened before Cole could formulate a response that wouldn't sound completely insane. "Cole's in tech. He's exploring rural communities for potential business opportunities." The lie came easily, protecting both of them from explanations that would become community gossip within hours. Sarah's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced, but she accepted the explanation with grace. "Well, enjoy your visit. Maren, call me tomorrow. I want to hear about your new project." After Sarah left, Maren slumped back in her booth. "I'm sorry about that. Small towns come with limited privacy. No need to apologize. Though I'm curious about my sudden career in rural business development. Better than explaining that you drove 300 miles because of a drunk text from someone you'd never met." "Point taken," Cole smiled. "Though for what it's worth, I think your friend is just looking out for you. Sarah's been protecting me since 3rd grade. When Bobby Henderson pulled my hair and she dumped chocolate milk on his head, the memory made Maren smile, despite her current discomfort. She means well, but she also has strong opinions about my social choices." "What kind of opinions?" "She thinks I'm too isolated." She's probably right, but her solution involves a series of blind dates with divorced men who are perfectly nice and good providers but have about as much romantic appeal as tax preparation. Harsh assessment of tax preparation. You haven't met her dating prospects. They finished dinner as daylight faded completely, the restaurant's warm lighting creating an intimate atmosphere that made their conversation feel increasingly natural. When Jack Murphy stopped by their table to chat about the upcoming Harvest Festival, Maren found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythms of small-town socializing. "Nice guy," Cole observed after Jack moved on to other tables. "He's good people. Lost his wife to cancer 2 years ago, but he keeps the restaurant going because it's what she would have wanted." Maren glanced around the dining room, seeing it through Cole's eyes. "I know it's not sophisticated, but there's something to be said for a place where people know your story. Even when knowing your story means limited privacy. Especially then. It means you matter enough for people to pay attention." Cole was quiet for a moment, seeming to process the concept of mattering to a community in ways that went beyond professional achievement or financial contribution. "I can't remember the last time someone noticed whether I showed up somewhere," he said. Finally, the admission hung between them, vulnerable and honest. Maren reached across the table without thinking. covering his hand with hers in a gesture of comfort that surprised them both. "That sounds lonely," she said simply. "It is," he replied, not pulling his hand away. "But today feels different." The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that made every color more vivid and every sound more distinct. Maren woke earlier than usual, her mind immediately returning to the previous evening's impossible encounter. For a moment, lying in her childhood bed surrounded by familiar shadows, she wondered if she'd dreamed the entire experience. Then her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for dinner and honest conversation. Would you be interested in showing me around your town today? Cole." The message proved the evening had been real, but it also presented a new dilemma. Spending another day with Cole meant acknowledging that whatever was happening between them deserved continued exploration. It meant stepping further away from her carefully controlled routine towards something unpredictable and potentially significant. She found herself standing in front of her closet, considering clothing choices with more care than she'd invested in months. Not because she wanted to impress Cole. Exactly, but because she felt more like herself around him, more like the woman she'd been before. Years of gradual diminishment had convinced her she was ordinary. Her phone rang as she was debating between comfortable jeans and a slightly more flattering sweater. So Sarah's voice carried the tone of someone who'd been waiting for acceptable calling hours. Who was he really? "Good morning to you too, Sarah. Don't deflect. That man didn't drive to Cedar Falls looking for business opportunities. His clothes cost more than my car payment, and he looked at you like you were the most interesting person he'd ever met." Maren sank onto her bed, recognizing that Sarah's protective instincts were in full investigation mode. "It's complicated. Most interesting things are, but that doesn't mean they're dangerous. He seems like a good person," Maren said carefully. "But you're right that the business opportunity story isn't exactly accurate. So what's the real story?" Maren found herself explaining the text message incident, watching Sarah's expressions change from suspicion to amazement to something approaching approval. "Let me understand this correctly," Sarah said when Maren finished. "You sent a drunk text to the wrong number, and instead of ignoring it or responding with something creepy, this man drove 300 miles just to meet you. I know how it sounds. It sounds romantic. Completely insane, but romantic." Sarah's voice softened. "When was the last time someone made that kind of gesture for you?" The question hit harder than Sarah probably intended. Richard had been practical in his affections, demonstrating love through financial security and social status rather than grand gestures or spontaneous romance. Even during their courtship, his approach had been methodical. Flowers on appropriate occasions, dinners at restaurants chosen for their reputation rather than atmosphere. "Never," Maren admitted. "Then maybe you should stop questioning it and start enjoying it." An hour later, Maren stood on her front porch, watching Cole's modest rental car pull into her driveway. He'd chosen something deliberately unremarkable, a silver sedan that wouldn't attract attention in a community where conspicuous consumption was viewed with suspicion. "Good morning," he called as he approached, carrying 2 coffee cups from the local drive-thru. "I wasn't sure how you liked your coffee, so I guessed." The thoughtful gesture felt significant after years of marriage to someone who'd never learned her preferences despite daily opportunities. "Thank you." That was considerate. She accepted the cup and found he'd guessed correctly. Cream, no sugar, strong enough to be meaningful. The accuracy felt like a small miracle of attention. "So," Cole said, settling onto the porch steps beside her, "what does a grand tour of Cedar Falls include?" "That depends on your interests. We have a thriving downtown district consisting of 6 blocks, a historical society that's open by appointment, and a park with a pond where teenagers go to make questionable decisions." Sounds perfect. They began with Main Street, walking slowly past storefronts that had remained largely unchanged for decades. Maren found herself seeing her town through Cole's eyes, the hand-painted signs, the wide sidewalks designed for conversation rather than efficiency, the easy familiarity between shop owners and customers. at Brennan's Hardware, old Jim Brennan emerged from behind the counter to chat about the weather and inquire about Maren's roof repairs, with the kind of personal interest that small-town business owners considered customer service. Your gutters looked rough last time I drove past, Jim observed. Winter's coming, and you don't want ice backing up under those shingles? I know, Maren replied. It's on my list. My grandson does good work for fair prices. I could have him stop by with an estimate. The exchange continued for several minutes, covering topics from her mother's garden to the upcoming harvest festival. Cole listened without impatience, seeming genuinely interested in the interconnected nature of community relationships. Does everyone in town know your housing situation? He asked as they continued down the street. Pretty much. It's one of the benefits and curses of small-town life. People notice when you need help, but they also notice when you're struggling. At the library, Mrs. Chen greeted them with barely concealed delight and immediately began showing Cole the local history collection. Apparently having decided he was worthy of the full cultural orientation, "This is our crown jewel," she announced, indicating a display case containing photographs from the town's founding. Cedar Falls was established in 1887 by lumber workers who decided the location was too beautiful to leave. Cole studied the sepia-toned images with genuine interest, asking questions about the early settlers and the evolution of local industry. His attention seemed to charm Mrs. Chen, who rarely had opportunities to share her extensive knowledge of community history. Maren's family has been here since the 1920s, Mrs. Chen added, clearly intent on establishing Maren's local credentials. Her grandfather helped build the original school building. Is that right? Cole turned to Maren with increased interest. What was he like? A carpenter who believed education was the foundation of democracy, Maren replied. He worked on the school for cost of materials because he wanted every child in town to have access to learning. Runs in the family, Mrs. Chen observed meaningfully. As they left the library, Maren felt the warm satisfaction of having shared something important about her heritage with someone who seemed to genuinely appreciate its significance. Your grandfather sounds like a remarkable man, Cole said. He was. My father always said I inherited his idealism and my grandmother's stubborn streak. Useful combination. They ended the morning tour at Riverside Park, where the Cascade River wound through maples and oaks that had turned brilliant shades of gold and scarlet. A few families were enjoying the sunny weather, children playing on swings while parents chatted on benches. It's beautiful here, Cole said, settling beside Maren on a bench overlooking the water. Richard always said it was too quiet. He wanted to move somewhere with more opportunities, more sophistication. The memory carried less pain than it once had. I think he was ashamed of where I came from, his loss. The simple response carried more validation than years of reassurance from well-meaning friends. Cole wasn't trying to fix her hurt or minimize Richard's failings. He was simply acknowledging that someone had failed to appreciate something valuable. Can I ask you something? Maren said. What happens after today? You've seen my town, met my friends, heard my story. Tomorrow, you'll go back to Portland and your real life, and this will become an interesting anecdote. Cole was quiet for a long moment, watching the river flow past. I don't know, he said finally, but I know I don't want today to end. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maren's backyard as she led Cole through the gate beside her house. What had once been her mother's pride, a carefully tended garden with raised beds and flowering borders, now showed the neglect of 2 years without consistent care. Weeds had claimed territory among the perennials, and the small greenhouse needed new glass panels. My mother spent hours out here every day, Maren explained, surveying the overgrown landscape with a mixture of guilt and overwhelm. She could make anything grow. I've been meaning to restore it, but between work and house maintenance, it keeps getting pushed aside. Cole rolled up his sleeves without comment, locating a pair of work gloves on the potting bench. Where should we start? You don't need to. I want to help. His tone carried gentle insistence. Besides, I can't remember the last time I worked with my hands on something that wasn't a keyboard. They fell into a companionable rhythm, clearing weeds from around the established plantings and discovering forgotten bulbs that would bloom again come spring. The physical labor created a different kind of intimacy than conversation, shared purpose without the need for constant communication. Your mother planted these? Cole asked, indicating a row of daffodil bulbs they'd uncovered every fall for 20 years. She said spring flowers were promises that winter wouldn't last forever. Maren brushed soil from her hands, remembering her mother's patient explanations about planting depths and spacing. I should have kept up with it. You still can. It's harder to maintain hope when you're doing it alone. Cole straightened from where he'd been pulling invasive vines, his expression thoughtful. Maybe that's why gardens are better as community projects. The observation carried weight beyond its surface, meaning suggesting possibilities for shared responsibility and mutual care that Maren hadn't considered. Their work was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Chen, who appeared at the garden gate carrying a thermos and wearing an expression of barely contained approval. "I brought tea," she announced, as if finding Cole helping with yard work was exactly what she'd expected. "And wisdom, though I suspect you're both too sensible to need much guidance." She settled onto the old wooden bench her husband had built years earlier, pouring tea into 3 mismatched mugs with the efficiency of someone accustomed to outdoor hospitality. "Cole," she said, offering him the first cup, "tell me about your family." The question carried the tone of a friendly interrogation, and Maren felt simultaneously grateful for Mrs. Chen's protective instincts and embarrassed by their transparency. "My parents live in San Francisco," Cole replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "My father runs an investment firm. My mother serves on various charity boards. I have a younger sister who's a pediatric surgeon in Seattle." "Impressive family." "Accomplished family," Cole corrected gently. "Not always the same thing." Mrs. Chen's eyes sharpened with interest. "And what do they think of your business success?" "They're proud of the financial achievement. Less enthusiastic about my recent questioning of whether achievement is the same as fulfillment." "Ah." Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "The curse of getting what you thought you wanted." "Something like that. And now you're helping Maren with her garden instead of managing your empire. The empire can manage itself for a weekend. This feels more important." Mrs. Chen glanced between them with the satisfaction of someone whose matchmaking instincts had been validated. "Important things usually feel risky," she observed. "Safe choices rarely require courage." After Mrs. Chen departed with the empty thermos and several pointed comments about the value of good men who weren't afraid of honest work, Maren found herself alone with Cole in the golden light of late afternoon. "She's protective of you," Cole observed, returning to his weeding with renewed focus. "She lost her daughter to a car accident 15 years ago. I think I become a surrogate of sorts." Maren paused in her own work, watching Cole's careful attention to preserving the plants while removing the invasive growth. "She worries that I've given up on happiness." "Have you?" The question deserved honesty. "I thought I had. It seemed safer than continuing to hope for things that might not happen." "What changed your mind?" "A stranger showing up at my door because of a message I never meant to send." She met his eyes across the garden bed. "You're either the answer to a prayer I was afraid to pray, or you're going to break my heart in ways I haven't recovered from yet." Cole set down his gardening tools and moved closer, his expression serious. "I can't promise I won't hurt you. I don't have a great track record with relationships, and I'm still figuring out what I want my life to look like." "That's refreshingly honest, but I can promise that whatever happens between us will be real. No games, no manipulation, no using you to fill some void in my life." He reached for her hands, his own still dirty from their shared labor. "You deserve better than being someone's temporary solution." The promise felt more valuable than romantic declarations or grand gestures. It acknowledged the risk they were both taking while committing to treat that risk with appropriate respect. "Sarah stopped by this morning," Maren said, not pulling her hands away. She wanted to know your real story. What did you tell her? The truth. That you drove 300 miles because of a drunk text, and that I have no idea what to do with that information. What did she say? That maybe I should stop questioning it and start enjoying it. Smart friend, protective friend. She's seen me hurt before, and she doesn't want to watch it happen again. Cole was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Can I tell you something that might sound presumptuous? We're past the point of worrying about presumption. I think you've been settling for less than you deserve for so long that recognizing genuine interest feels dangerous. His thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture both comforting and intimate. But danger and risk aren't the same thing. Sometimes the biggest risk is playing it safe. The observation touched something deep in Maren's understanding of herself. Years of marriage to Richard had trained her to expect conditional affection, love that required her to be smaller, quieter, less demanding. The possibility that someone might value her exactly as she was felt revolutionary and terrifying. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Whatever this is. Neither do I, Cole replied. But I'm willing to figure it out if you are. As evening approached, they worked together to clean up their tools and survey their progress. The garden wasn't restored, but it looked cared for again, like a space where growth was possible and welcome. Tomorrow's Sunday, Maren said as they walked toward the house. The hardware store is closed, but Jack's Diner serves the best pancakes in 3 counties. Is that an invitation? It's a test. If you can handle small-town breakfast conversations with people who will definitely ask personal questions, then maybe you're serious about figuring this out. Cole smiled, the expression transforming his face in ways that made Maren's pulse quicken. What time should I pick you up? Sunday morning at Jack's Diner brought the weekly gathering of Cedar Falls regulars, farmers discussing crop yields, retirees solving the world's problems over endless coffee refills, and families celebrating the luxury of pancakes they didn't have to cook themselves. Maren and Cole found a booth near the window where morning light illuminated the comfortable chaos of community breakfast. The usual, Maren? Asked Jenny, the waitress who'd been working Sunday shifts since high school. Please. And Cole will have... I can speak for myself, Cole said with gentle humor. What do you recommend? Depends on your appetite. The lumberjack special will keep you fed until dinner, but if you're not used to serious breakfast, the short stack might be safer. Lumberjack special sounds perfect. Jenny grinned approvingly. I like a man who's not afraid of real food. As she left to place their order, Maren noticed the subtle attention their table was receiving from other diners. In a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, Cole's presence for a second consecutive day would be noted and discussed. You're causing quite a stir, she observed quietly. Good stir or bad stir? Curious stir. Most people are probably wondering if you're my mysterious boyfriend or just passing through. What would you prefer them to think? The question caught her off guard. What did she want people to think? That she was capable of attracting someone interesting. That her life held possibilities beyond routine and solitude. That she deserved more than the careful sympathy of neighbors who'd watched her marriage crumble. Before she could formulate an answer, Cole's phone buzzed insistently on the table. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted to something approaching alarm. I'm sorry, I need to take this, he said, already standing. It's my business partner. He stepped outside, and Maren could see him through the window, his body language becoming increasingly tense as the conversation progressed. Other diners were beginning to notice the drama, their interest shifting from polite curiosity to active speculation. Cole returned to the table looking shaken, his earlier ease replaced by obvious stress. Everything all right? Maren asked. Not exactly. He sat heavily, running his hands through his hair. There's a crisis at the company. A security breach that's compromised client data. My partner needs me back in Portland immediately. The words hit Maren like cold water, reminding her abruptly that Cole had a real life with real responsibilities that existed far beyond her small-town world. Of course you have to go, she said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. I don't want to leave like this, but you have to. Their breakfast arrived as Cole was visibly struggling with competing obligations. Jenny set down plates of food that suddenly seemed irrelevant to both of them. "Actually," Cole said, standing again, "I should pack and get on the road." "This can't wait." He pulled out his wallet, but Maren waved him away. "Go, I'll handle breakfast." "Maren, it's fine. This is your real life. I understand." But as Cole gathered his jacket and moved toward the door, something fell from his pocket, a small metal bracelet that skittered across the linoleum floor. Maren bent to retrieve it, intending to call him back, but the engraved words stopped her cold. "Medical alert, cardiovascular disease. Emergency contact, Dr. Sarah Martinez, Portland General Hospital." The bracelet lay in her palm like an accusation. This wasn't just a business crisis pulling Cole away. This was evidence of something he'd deliberately hidden from her. A medical condition serious enough to require constant monitoring, important enough to carry emergency contact information. She looked up to see Cole halfway to his car, unaware he'd dropped the bracelet. Everything about their weekend together suddenly felt different, viewed through the lens of information he'd chosen not to share. Had his impulsive drive to meet her been motivated by genuine interest, or by someone facing mortality, making desperate attempts at connection? Maren paid for breakfast with hands that shook slightly, nodding politely to neighbors who offered sympathetic comments about her gentleman friend's sudden departure. She walked home slowly, the medical bracelet weighing heavily in her pocket like evidence of betrayal. An hour later, as she was trying to process the morning's revelations, a black sedan pulled into her driveway. A well-dressed man in his 50s emerged, adjusting his tie with the precision of someone accustomed to making important impressions. "Ms. Garrett? I'm David Chen, no relation to Eleanor, Cole Davidson's business partner." His smile carried professional warmth without genuine emotion. "I wonder if we might have a word." Maren invited him into her living room, where he perched uncomfortably on her father's old recliner, clearly out of place among the modest furnishings and family photographs. "I want to be direct with you," David began. "Cole is going through a difficult period right now. His recent medical diagnosis has affected his judgment significantly." "What kind of diagnosis?" Maren asked, though she suspected she already knew. "He didn't tell you?" David's expression suggested this confirmed his worst suspicions. "He's dealing with a serious cardiac condition that will require ongoing treatment and lifestyle modifications. The stress has made him unusually impulsive." "Impulsive how?" "Making irrational decisions, abandoning responsibilities, pursuing relationships that aren't in his best interest." David leaned forward earnestly. "I'm sure you're a lovely person, Ms. Garrett, but Cole needs stability right now, not romantic complications." The words stung, but Maren kept her expression neutral. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "That this weekend was a symptom of his current instability, not a genuine connection. Cole has a tendency to romanticize situations when he's under stress. He's done it before." "Done what before?" "Fixated on women he perceives as authentic or real, as opposed to the sophisticated social circles he usually moves in. It never ends well for anyone involved." Maren felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You're saying I'm just another in a pattern of inappropriate fixations?" "I'm saying Cole is vulnerable right now, and he needs people who understand his world and can support his recovery. His family has already identified several suitable women who could provide the kind of partnership he needs." Suitable women. Accomplished. Sophisticated women who understand the demands of his lifestyle and the importance of his business responsibilities. David's tone suggested he found it obvious that Maren didn't qualify. "On any of these counts, I see. I hope you understand this isn't personal. Cole speaks very highly of you, but his judgment simply isn't reliable at the moment. The kindest thing you could do is encourage him to focus on his health and his responsibilities." After David left, Maren sat in her living room holding Cole's medical bracelet and processing the conversation. Everything she'd believed about their connection was being reframed as the delusions of a sick man seeking escape from his reality. Her small-town life, which had felt charming and authentic through Cole's eyes, now seemed provincial and inadequate. But something about David's explanation didn't feel right. The Cole she'd spent the weekend with hadn't seemed delusional or escaping reality. He'd seemed like someone discovering what he actually wanted after years of pursuing what he thought he should want. Her phone buzzed with a text from Cole, back in Portland. "Crisis contained, but I need to stay here for a few days to handle fallout. I left something at your house, a medical bracelet I wear sometimes. Could you mail it to me?" The casual tone of the message suggested he didn't realize the significance of what he'd dropped. Or perhaps he was testing whether she'd discovered his secret. Either way, she now had to decide whether to confront him about what she'd learned, or to accept David's explanation and step away from a situation that might be causing more harm than good. She looked around her living room at the photo albums, documenting a life that probably seemed impossibly small to someone with Cole's resources, at the vinyl records that represented the simple pleasures she'd learned to value, at the windows that looked out on a community where she mattered but would never be sophisticated. Maybe David was right. Maybe she was just a romantic detour for someone whose real life was too complex and demanding for small-town simplicity. Maybe the kindest thing she could do was to return the medical bracelet with a polite note and let Cole return to his appropriate world. But as she held the bracelet up to the afternoon light, studying the worn metal that had obviously been carried for months or years, she realized she wasn't ready to give up on the possibility that what they'd shared was real, whatever Cole's medical situation might be. The 2 weeks that followed Cole's departure passed with the peculiar slow motion of waiting. Maren returned to her library routine, but found herself distracted by thoughts that circled endlessly between hope and pragmatism. Cole's medical bracelet remained on her nightstand, a daily reminder of decisions she hadn't yet made. Their communication had dwindled to polite text exchanges, Cole asking about her garden progress, Maren inquiring about his business crisis. Neither addressed the obvious questions hanging between them: his hidden medical condition, David's visit, or what their weekend together had actually meant. At work, Mrs. Chen watched Maren with the patience of someone who'd lived long enough to recognize the signs of internal struggle. "You're going to wear a hole in that carpet if you keep pacing," Mrs. Chen observed during a quiet Tuesday afternoon. As Maren processed returned books with unusual intensity, "I'm not pacing. I'm efficiently organizing. You've alphabetized that section 3 times in the last hour." Mrs. Chen set down her own work and studied Maren with concern. "What's troubling you, dear one?" Maren found herself explaining David's visit and Cole's medical condition, watching Mrs. Chen's expression shift from interest to indignation. "This business partner told you that Cole's feelings weren't real because he has a heart condition?" Mrs. Chen's voice carried the sharp edge she usually reserved for patrons who mistreated library materials. "He said Cole's judgment is compromised by stress and that I'm just another inappropriate fixation, and you believed him." "I don't know what to believe." Maren slumped against the circulation desk. "What if he's right? What if I'm just some middle-aged fantasy for a sick man trying to escape his real life?" Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "Do you remember when my husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's?" "Of course. People kept telling me that his personality changes were symptoms of the disease, that his increased affection, his desire to travel, his sudden interest in poetry, none of it was really him anymore." Mrs. Chen's voice softened with memory. "But I lived with that man for 43 years. I knew the difference between disease and authenticity." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes illness doesn't change who we are. Sometimes it removes the barriers that kept us from being who we always were." Mrs. Chen reached across the desk to squeeze Maren's hand. "Maybe Cole's condition didn't make him seek you out. Maybe it gave him the courage to act on what he genuinely wanted." The conversation stayed with Maren as she walked home through streets lined with trees that had lost most of their autumn colors. Winter was approaching with its familiar promise of long nights and careful solitude. But this year the prospect felt different, heavier with possibility and regret. At home, she found herself standing in her father's study, surrounded by the books and papers he'd accumulated over a lifetime of methodical curiosity. In the bottom drawer of his desk, she discovered a wooden box containing letters her parents had written to each other during her father's military deployment before she was born. She read them by lamplight, absorbing the evidence of young love tested by distance and uncertainty. Her father's careful handwriting documented his fears about the future and his certainty that whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. Her mother's responses revealed a woman of quiet strength who refused to let fear make decisions for love. "I would rather spend an uncertain year with you than a guaranteed lifetime with anyone else," her mother had written. In a letter dated just before her father's return, the words resonated with unexpected power. Maren realized she'd been approaching her situation with Cole as a problem to be solved rather than a choice to be made. She'd been looking for guarantees in a situation that, by its very nature, required faith. She retrieved her laptop and began composing a letter, not an email or text, but something written with the deliberate care that important communications deserved. The words came slowly at first, then with increasing clarity as she worked through her thoughts. "Dear Cole, I have your medical bracelet. You dropped it at the diner Sunday morning, and I've been carrying it around like evidence of something, though I'm not sure what. Your business partner visited me. He explained about your diagnosis and suggested that your interest in me was a symptom rather than a choice. He painted a picture of a sick man making poor decisions, fixating on inappropriate women who couldn't provide the kind of sophisticated support you apparently need. I spent 2 weeks deciding whether he was right, whether I should mail your bracelet back with a polite note and let you return to your appropriate life with suitable women who understand your world. But tonight I found letters my parents wrote to each other during the war, and I realized I've been asking the wrong questions. Instead of wondering whether our connection is real enough to justify the uncertainty, I should be asking whether it's real enough to be worth the risk. I think it is. I don't know anything about cardiovascular disease or the demands of your business empire. I can't provide the kind of sophisticated partnership your family probably envisions for you. But I can offer something that might be more valuable. Someone who values you for reasons that have nothing to do with what you can provide or achieve. You said our weekend together felt real. It felt real to me too. Not because we have so much in common, but because we were honest with each other in ways that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. If you want to explore what that honesty might become, I'm willing to figure it out with you. If your diagnosis changes the timeline or the possibilities, we'll work with whatever time we have. If your world and mine seem incompatible, we'll find ways to bridge the distance. But if you've decided that I'm too risky or too complicated or too small town for whatever future you're planning, then please tell me directly. Don't let well-meaning business partners make that decision for you. I'm enclosing your bracelet, not because I'm returning it, but because I thought you should have it while you're making your choice. Whatever you decide. Thank you for the most honest weekend I've had in years. Maren. She printed the letter on her father's cream-colored stationery, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope along with Cole's medical bracelet. Tomorrow, she would mail it, taking the kind of emotional risk she'd spent years avoiding. But tonight, she allowed herself to hope. 300 miles away in Portland, Cole sat in his penthouse apartment reviewing quarterly reports that no longer held his attention. The business crisis had been resolved efficiently, but the return to his normal routine felt hollow after the vitality of his weekend in Cedar Falls. Dr. Martinez had been blunt about his recent behavior during their Thursday session. "Your family is concerned," she'd observed. "David says you've been making impulsive decisions that worry them. My family has been concerned about my decisions since I was 12 years old and chose art class over tennis lessons. This is different. Cole, you have a serious medical condition that requires careful management. Stress and emotional upheaval can literally be dangerous for you right now. So I should live in a bubble to protect my heart? You should make thoughtful choices about what stress is worth accepting. Cole had left the session more confused than clarified. Was his attraction to Maren a symptom of medical stress, or was it the first genuine emotional connection he'd made in years? How could he tell the difference when everyone around him seemed invested in a particular interpretation? His sister Emma had called 3 times in the past week, each conversation a variation on the same theme: concern for his health mixed with gentle pressure to consider more suitable romantic options. His parents had invited him to dinner twice, both occasions featuring carefully orchestrated encounters with accomplished women who shared his educational background and social status. All of these women were impressive in ways that should have mattered to him. They were intelligent, successful, and capable of navigating the complexities of his lifestyle. They understood charity galas and board meetings and the unspoken rules of wealthy social circles, but none of them asked him questions that made him think. None of them listened with the kind of attention that made him feel heard rather than simply acknowledged. None of them made him want to help with their gardens, or meet their surrogate mothers, or understand the communities that had shaped them. His phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner tomorrow? There's someone I'd like you to meet." Cole stared at the message, realizing he'd reached a decision point. He could continue allowing other people to make choices for him based on their assessment of his needs and capabilities. He could accept the comfortable path that led toward appropriate partnerships and managed risk, or he could trust his own judgment about what made him feel most alive. Regardless of whether that choice satisfied other people's expectations, he deleted David's message without responding and reached for his laptop. If he was going to make a choice about Maren, it should be his choice, based on his own assessment of what mattered most. The email he composed was shorter than he'd intended, but more honest than most communications he'd written in years. "Maren, I should have told you about my diagnosis. Not because it changes how I feel about you, but because you deserved to make informed decisions about what you were getting into. David means well, but he's wrong about my judgment being compromised. My condition hasn't made me delusional. It's made me honest about what I actually want instead of what I think I should want. I want to come back to Cedar Falls, not to escape my life, but to see if we can build something real together despite all the reasons it shouldn't work. Would you be willing to try?" Cole, he sent the message before he could second-guess himself, then sat in his expensive apartment, overlooking a city full of appropriate opportunities, waiting for a response from a small town that felt more like home than anywhere he'd ever lived. Cole's drive through the night felt different this time. Less impulsive exploration and more deliberate homecoming. He'd left Portland at midnight after receiving Maren's letter, his heart racing not from medical stress, but from the possibility that he might be too late. The for sale sign in her front yard when he arrived at dawn felt like a physical blow. The house sat empty in the pale morning light, no car in the driveway, no lights in the windows. Cole sat in his rental car staring at the sign, trying to process the implications. Had Maren decided to leave Cedar Falls? Was she running from their connection? Or simply moving on with her life after he'd failed to respond to her honesty with equal courage? He knocked on the front door anyway, hope overriding logic. But the hollow echo confirmed what the visual evidence suggested. Mrs. Chen's house across the street showed signs of life. Lights in the kitchen, the morning newspaper retrieved from the porch. But Cole hesitated to intrude on a neighbor's morning with his personal crisis. The decision was made for him when Mrs. Chen appeared on her front porch, coffee mug in hand, wearing the expression of someone who'd been watching for something specific. "You're back," she called across the street, her tone neither surprised nor entirely welcoming. Cole approached her porch with the careful deference due to someone whose approval he hadn't yet earned. "I received Maren's letter. I came as soon as I could. Bit late for grand gestures, isn't it?" Mrs. Chen's sharp eyes assessed him with the precision of someone evaluating his worthiness. That sign went up 3 days ago. Where is she? That depends on why you're asking. The challenge in her voice reminded Cole that small-town protective instincts extended beyond polite concern. Mrs. Chen was testing his intentions, determining whether he deserved access to information about someone she clearly considered family. "I'm asking because I love her," Cole said, the words emerging with a clarity that surprised him. "I'm asking because I spent 2 weeks letting other people convince me that my feelings weren't real, and I want to spend whatever time I have left convincing her that they are." Mrs. Chen studied his face for a long moment, then set down her coffee mug with decisive precision. "She's at Riverside Park, has been since 5 this morning, sitting by the water trying to decide whether to sign the final papers." Final papers. House sale. Job transfer. New life in Portland, of all places. Mrs. Chen's expression suggested she found the location choice either ironic or telling. Said she was tired of living in the past and waiting for things that might never happen. The words hit Cole like an accusation. While he'd been paralyzed by other people's opinions and his own fears, Maren had made the difficult decision to pursue her deferred dreams. Even if it meant leaving behind everything familiar. She's moving to Portland. Teaching position at a community college. Starts next month. Mrs. Chen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a more serious register. "Cole, that girl has spent her whole life making herself smaller to fit other people's expectations. If you're here to ask her to do that again, you should get back in your car and drive away. I'm here to ask her to take a chance on something bigger." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, as if his answer had passed some crucial test. "Then you'd better hurry. Real estate agent is meeting her at 10 o'clock. Cole found Maren exactly where Mrs. Chen had predicted, sitting on the same bench where they'd shared honest conversation just 2 weeks earlier. She wore jeans and a heavy sweater against the morning chill, and her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look younger and more vulnerable than he remembered. She didn't turn when she heard footsteps on the gravel path, as if she'd been expecting his arrival or was too lost in thought to notice. Only when he cleared his throat did she look up, her expression cycling through surprise, wariness, and something that might have been relief. "You got my letter," she said. "Not quite a question. I got your letter and your email." And the sudden realization that I'm an idiot. Cole gestured toward the empty space beside her on the bench. "May I?" She nodded, and he settled beside her, both of them looking out over the water that reflected the gray, sky-like hammered metal. "Mrs. Chen tells me you're moving to Portland." Mrs. Chen has a big mouth, but Maren's tone held affection rather than annoyance. "Teaching job opened up. Fiction writing and composition." It seemed like a sign, or a coincidence. I prefer signs. They're more encouraging than coincidences. She turned to face him directly. "What are you doing here, Cole, really?" The question deserved the honesty she'd given him, unfiltered by diplomacy or careful phrasing. "I'm here because I spent 2 weeks listening to everyone else's opinions about what I should want, and I realized the only opinion that matters is yours." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew her letter, now creased from repeated reading. "You asked me to tell you directly if I'd decided you were too risky or complicated. I'm here to tell you directly that you're worth every risk, even with your medical condition, even with the uncertainty about the future, especially because of the uncertainty. My diagnosis taught me that guaranteed futures are illusions anyway. The only thing we can control is how we choose to spend whatever time we have." Maren stared at Cole for a long moment, processing his words against the backdrop of her own carefully constructed plans for starting over. The teaching position in Portland had felt like destiny when it was offered, a chance to pursue dreams she'd deferred for decades, in a city where she could disappear into anonymity and rebuild her sense of self. "You're asking me to give up the first real opportunity I've had in 20 years, she said quietly. "I'm asking you to consider that maybe the opportunity isn't the job. Maybe it's this." He gestured between them, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd finally understood what mattered most. "We could figure out the geography. We could make it work, could we?" Maren turned back toward the water, watching a family of ducks navigate the current with apparent ease. Your world and mine don't exactly overlap, Cole. Your business partner made that very clear. David doesn't speak for me. Neither does my family or my medical team or anyone else who thinks they know what's best for my situation. Cole's voice carried new authority, as if he'd finally claimed ownership of his own decisions. The only person whose opinion matters about my life is yours. The assertion hung between them, bold and vulnerable. Maren felt the weight of being given that kind of influence over someone else's choices, the responsibility that came with mattering that much to another person. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "I don't know yet. That's what makes it worth doing." Cole shifted on the bench to face her more directly. "But I know I want to find out what it means to build something together instead of trying to fit someone else into a life I've already constructed." A car pulled into the parking area behind them, a white sedan that Maren recognized as belonging to Janet Reynolds, the real estate agent who'd been handling the house sale. 10 o'clock, the appointment she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "That's my real estate agent," Maren said, her stomach tightening with the proximity of irreversible decisions. "Are you going to sell?" "I don't know." The admission surprised her with its honesty. "Part of me thinks I should. Clean slate, fresh start, no complications from the past. And the other part? The other part realizes that running away to start over isn't the same as moving towards something better." Janet Reynolds approached, their bench with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to closing deals on schedule. "Maren, good morning. Ready to sign the final papers?" Maren stood, but didn't immediately follow Janet toward the car where the documents waited. Instead, she turned back to Cole, seeing in his expression the same uncertainty she felt about making irreversible choices without knowing all the outcomes. "Give me 5 minutes," she told Janet. "I need to clarify something." First, Janet's expression suggested professional patience with client hesitation, but she nodded and returned to her car to make phone calls while she waited. "Cole," Maren said, sitting back down beside him, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "All right. If your diagnosis is as serious as your business partner suggested, what are we really talking about here? Are we planning a future together, or are you looking for someone to help you face an uncertain timeline?" The question was harder to ask than she'd expected, but it felt necessary. She needed to understand whether he was choosing her or simply choosing against loneliness, whether their connection was about building something lasting or finding comfort in whatever time remained. Cole was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the careful precision of someone who'd given the question serious thought. "My cardiologist says I have maybe 20 good years if I manage the condition properly. Maybe 30 if medical advances continue. Maybe 10 if I'm unlucky." He met her eyes directly. "Those aren't guarantees anyone gets, regardless of their medical history. That's not really an answer." "Yes, it is. I'm not asking you to be my caretaker or my comfort in the face of mortality. I'm asking you to take the same risk everyone takes when they choose to love someone. The risk that it might not last as long as we hope, but that it will matter while it does." The honesty was stark and real in a way that felt both frightening and liberating. Maren realized that she'd been looking for guarantees that no relationship could provide, trying to protect herself from losses that were inevitable parts of any meaningful connection. "And if I choose the teaching job, if I move to Portland and we try to figure this out from there, then we figure it out from there. If you choose to stay in Cedar Falls and I relocate some of my business operations here, we figure it out from here." Cole reached for her hands, his touch warm despite the morning chill. "The geography matters less than the choice to try." Janet Reynolds was approaching again, documents in hand, clearly ready to conclude their business. Maren looked at the papers that represented one kind of future, then at Cole, who represented another kind entirely, from her pocket. She withdrew her wedding ring, the symbol of promises that hadn't survived, of love that had gradually transformed into obligation and disappointment. She'd been carrying it for weeks, unable to decide whether to sell it or store it away as a reminder of lessons learned. Now she made a different choice, sliding the ring from her finger with deliberate finality and dropping it into the park's donation box for the Children's Playground Fund. "I choose to try," she said, turning back to Cole with a smile that felt like the beginning of something entirely new. 6 months later, the wind chimes Cole had hung from Maren's front porch created a gentle symphony in the spring breeze. They were simple brass tubes that caught light and sound in equal measure, creating music that spoke of home, peace, and harmony found after long searching. Maren sat on the porch steps, grading papers from her composition students at Cedar Falls Community College, where she'd accepted a position teaching part-time while completing her master's degree through an online program. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd found her way back to education not by moving to Portland, but by staying put and creating opportunities where she was. Cole emerged from the house, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, settling beside her with the easy domesticity they'd cultivated over months of learning each other's rhythms. His laptop bag sat nearby, evidence of the home office he'd established in what had once been her father's study. Running a tech company remotely had required adjustments, but the challenges had been offset by the satisfaction of building a life based on choice rather than obligation. "How are the essays today?" he asked, noting her stack of student papers. "Promising. I have 3 students who are genuinely talented writers, and 2 more who are discovering they have something to say." Maren set down her red pen and leaned against his shoulder. "What about your meeting with the Portland team?" "Productive. David's still convinced I've lost my mind, but the quarterly numbers are strong enough that he's stopped arguing with my management style." Cole's smile suggested he'd found peace with being misunderstood by people who equated geographic location with professional capability. The restructuring of his business had been complex but manageable. He'd maintained controlling interest while delegating day-to-day operations to partners who thrived on the urban energy he'd grown tired of. The arrangement allowed him to focus on strategic planning and product development, while building a life that felt authentic rather than impressive. Mrs. Chen appeared at the garden gate, carrying a basket of vegetables from her own plot and wearing the expression of someone with news to share. "Good morning." "You too," she called, approaching with the confidence of someone whose presence was always welcome. "Maren, I have tomatoes and coal. I have questions about that computer program you recommended for the library catalogue." Their relationship with Mrs. Chen had evolved into something resembling extended family, with dinner invitations flowing in both directions and advice offered freely, whether requested or not. She'd become Cole's unofficial guide to small-town social dynamics, while he'd introduced her to technologies that made her library work more efficient. "The catalog system is working well?" Cole asked, accepting the basket of tomatoes with genuine appreciation. "Beautifully. Though I still think you should charge the county for your consulting work instead of donating it." "Community service keeps me honest," Cole replied. A response that had become his standard deflection. When locals tried to pay him for technical assistance, he provided freely. His integration into Cedar Falls had been gradual but thorough. He coached Little League Baseball, volunteered at the Harvest Festival, and had become Jim Brennan's unofficial technology consultant, helping modernize the hardware store's inventory system. The transition from tech executive to community member had been smoother than anyone expected, perhaps because it felt less like transformation and more like discovery of who he'd always been beneath the professional expectations. "Any word from the cardiologist?" Mrs. Chen asked with the directness of someone who'd earned the right to inquire about personal matters. "Stable condition. No deterioration. Medication working well," Cole answered without defensiveness. His medical situation had become simply another factor they managed together. Like household budgets or work schedules, the early months had required adjustment to medications and lifestyle changes. But the modifications had been less dramatic than anticipated. Regular exercise, stress management, and the surprising therapeutic effects of small-town life had contributed to better health outcomes than his Portland specialists had predicted. "Excellent news," Mrs. Chen said with satisfaction. "Health is like gardens, flourishes better with proper attention and good company." After Mrs. Chen departed with promises to return their empty basket filled with her famous zucchini bread, Maren and Cole settled back into their morning routine. The spring air carried the scent of apple blossoms from the tree they'd planted in the backyard, a variety chosen for its ability to thrive in their climate and produce fruit for decades. "I have something for you," Cole said, reaching into his laptop bag to retrieve a small wrapped package. Maren accepted it with curiosity, unwrapping carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "For your writing," Cole explained. "I know you prefer working on the computer, but I thought you might enjoy having something for ideas that come when you're away from technology." The gift was thoughtful in ways that demonstrated months of paying attention to her habits and preferences. Maren had been working on a collection of essays about small-town life, and she often mentioned wishing she could capture thoughts that occurred during walks or conversations. "It's perfect," she said, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the morning traffic pass on Maple Street, neighbors heading to work, children walking to school, delivery trucks serving local businesses. The rhythms were familiar now, part of a life they'd built deliberately rather than inherited. "Any regrets?" Maren asked, a question that had become their periodic check-in, ensuring they remained honest about their choices. "Only that it took a misdirected text message to bring us together," Cole replied. "What about you?" "I regret waiting so long to take risks that mattered." The wind chimes created another gentle melody as a breeze moved through the maple leaves that had grown fuller and greener with the passing seasons. Neither Maren nor Cole could have predicted the specific shape their life together would take, but both had learned that the most meaningful outcomes often emerged from choices made with courage rather than certainty, as they gathered their morning coffee cups and headed inside to begin another day of work that felt like purpose rather than obligation. The wind chimes continued their quiet music, a soundtrack to a love story that had begun with 5 honest words and grown into something neither had dared to hope for. A future built on authenticity, partnership, and the patient courage required to choose each other every day.